James Bond 007 100 Facts to Gently Soothe You to Sleep Part 1. Welcome, and let yourself relax as we begin a journey into the world of James Bond 007. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and let the story unfold. In the spring of 1952, a man sat at his desk in Jamaica, looking out at the Caribbean Sea. His name was Ian Fleming, and he was about to create a character that would captivate the world for generations. Fleming had built a house on the northern coast of Jamaica, a place he called Golden Eye, named after a wartime operation he'd been involved with during his years in naval intelligence. It was here, in this tropical paradise, that he would spend 2 months each year writing. Fleming was 43 years old when he began typing the first pages of what would become Casino Royale. He was about to be married, and perhaps the prospect of domestic life prompted him to create a character who embodied freedom, adventure, and danger. The name he chose for his secret agent came from an unexpected source. On Fleming's bookshelf sat a guide to Caribbean birds, written by an American ornithologist named James Bond. Fleming found the name perfectly ordinary, even bland, which was exactly what he wanted for a character who needed to blend into the shadows. The James Bond that emerged from Fleming's typewriter was a complex man. He was a commander in the Royal Naval Volunteer Reserve, holding the rank that Fleming himself had achieved during the Second World War. Fleming drew heavily from his own experiences in naval intelligence, creating a spy who operated in a world he knew intimately. Bond's employee number, 007, carried special significance. The 00 prefix indicated that he held a license to kill in the line of duty, a grim necessity in the world of Cold War espionage. Fleming gave his creation specific tastes and habits that would become legendary. Bond's drink of choice, the vodka martini, was to be prepared in a very particular way, shaken, not stirred. This detail, which would become one of the most famous catchphrases in cinema history, first appeared in the pages of Fleming's novels. Bond was a man of refined but definite preferences, someone who knew what he wanted and how he wanted it. The first novel, Casino Royale, introduced readers to Bond's world in 1953. The story took place in a French casino, where Bond was tasked with defeating a Soviet agent at the baccarat table. Fleming wrote quickly, producing about 2,000 words each morning before breaking for lunch and an afternoon swim. He would complete each novel in just 2 months during his annual Jamaican retreat, maintaining this disciplined routine for over a decade. Bond's car in those early novels was not yet the Aston Martin that would become synonymous with the character. Fleming initially gave Bond a Bentley, a 1934.5-litre supercharged model in battleship grey. This choice reflected Bond's character as Fleming conceived him, elegant but practical, with an appreciation for British engineering and a touch of the classic gentleman's taste. The novels found an audience slowly at first, but steadily. Fleming published one Bond novel almost every year, building a following of devoted readers who were drawn to the exotic locations, the dangerous missions, and the sophisticated lifestyle of this secret agent. By the late 1950s, James Bond had become a phenomenon in Britain, with each new novel eagerly anticipated. In 1961, a young American president mentioned in an interview that one of Fleming's Bond novels, From Russia with Love, was among his favorite books. President John F. Kennedy's endorsement brought James Bond to wider international attention, particularly in the United States. Fleming's creation was about to make the leap from page to screen, though he couldn't have imagined how completely that transformation would capture the world's imagination. The film rights to the Bond novels had been optioned by producers Harry Saltzman and Albert R. Broccoli, two men who saw the cinematic potential in Fleming's spy. They formed a production company called Eon Productions, a name that suggested endurance and longevity. They were right to be optimistic. What they were about to create would become the longest-running film franchise in cinema history, spanning more than 6 decades and showing no signs of stopping. As you rest now, imagine those early days, the sound of a typewriter in a Jamaican study, the birth of a legend. Let yourself drift, knowing there is so much more of this story still to unfold. Part 2. The birth of Bond on screen. Breathe deeply now, and let us continue our gentle journey through the world of James Bond. The search for the right actor to bring James Bond to life on screen was not a simple matter. Saltzman and Broccoli considered many actors for the role, including Cary Grant, but they needed someone who could commit to multiple films, someone who could grow with the character. Their search led them to a relatively unknown Scottish actor named Sean Connery. At the time, Connery was earning just £100 a week, a modest wage for someone about to become an international superstar. Ian Fleming had his doubts when he first heard about the casting. He had envisioned Bond as more of a refined English gentleman, and Connery, with his working-class Scottish background and rugged physique, seemed far from that ideal. But the producers saw something special in Connery, a raw masculinity combined with natural charisma and a hint of danger lurking beneath the surface. They were right to trust their instincts. The first Bond film was not Casino Royale, despite it being the first novel. The rights to that story were complicated, tied up in legal issues that wouldn't be resolved for decades. Instead, the producers chose Dr. No, the 6th novel in Fleming's series, published in 1958. The decision was partly practical. Dr. No had a relatively simple plot that could be brought to the screen on a modest budget of just $1 million. Filming began in Jamaica in January 1962, returning Bond to the island where he had been born on the page. The production was not without its challenges. The budget was tight, and the crew had to be creative with their resources. But there was an energy on set, a sense that something special was being created. Connery brought an unexpected humor to the role, a lightness of touch that would become essential to the Bond character. One of the most iconic moments in cinema history was filmed during those early days in Jamaica. Bond introduces himself for the first time on screen, sitting at a baccarat table in an elegant casino. The camera slowly moves toward him as he lights a cigarette. When asked his name, he replies simply, "Bond. James Bond." Those 3 words, delivered with Connery's smooth confidence, would be repeated by actors for generations to come. The introduction was shot in a specific way, with Bond's face initially hidden, building anticipation before the reveal. The music for Dr. No introduced another element that would become inseparable from James Bond. Composer Monty Norman created the basic theme, but it was orchestrator and conductor John Barry who arranged what became known as the James Bond theme. Those distinctive guitar riffs, the brass stabs, the driving rhythm, they captured something essential about Bond: sophistication, danger, and irresistible forward momentum. The theme would open almost every Bond film for the next 6 decades. Dr. No premiered in London on October 5, 1962. The response was immediate and enthusiastic. Audiences loved the exotic locations, the action sequences, the sophisticated style, and most of all, they loved Sean Connery's James Bond. The film was a commercial success, earning over $59 million worldwide, an impressive return on the modest investment. More importantly, it proved that James Bond could work on screen, that there was an appetite for this kind of sophisticated adventure. Ian Fleming had a cameo of sorts in that first film, though he never appeared on screen. If you look carefully during the scene where Bond arrives in Jamaica, you can spot someone reading a book. The book is Dr. No itself, a playful nod to the author who started it all. Fleming, who had been skeptical about Connery, changed his mind after seeing the finished film. He was won over by the actor's performance and the way the film captured the spirit of his creation. The success of Dr. No meant that a sequel was quickly put into production. This time, the budget was larger, at $2 million, reflecting the producers' confidence that they had a franchise on their hands. They chose From Russia with Love, the novel that President Kennedy had praised, knowing that this endorsement would help with American audiences. The story was more complex and ambitious than Dr. No, featuring Cold War intrigue and a famous fight scene on the Orient Express. President Kennedy himself requested a private screening of From Russia with Love at the White House in 1963. It would be one of the last films he watched before his assassination in November of that year. The connection between Bond and Kennedy seemed almost fateful. Both represented a certain style of Cold War confidence, a belief that courage, intelligence, and charm could overcome any obstacle. Kennedy's love of the Bond novels had helped launch the character to international fame, and now the films were carrying that legend even further. Let your mind drift now. Imagine the lights of a premiere, the sound of that iconic theme, feel yourself relaxing deeper, as Bond's world continues to unfold around you. Part 3. Bondomania and the Golden Era. Rest easy now, and let the story carry you gently forward. The third Bond film marked a turning point, a moment when James Bond transformed from a successful film series into a genuine cultural phenomenon. Goldfinger, released in 1964, was the film that truly defined what a Bond movie could be. It had everything: a memorable villain, an impossible plan, elaborate gadgets, and a sense of spectacle that audiences had never quite seen before. The budget had grown again, this time to $3 million, and every penny showed on screen. Goldfinger introduced audiences to one of the most beloved elements of the Bond films, the gadget-filled Aston Martin DB5. This beautiful British sports car, painted in silver birch, came equipped with revolving number plates, tire slashers, a bulletproof screen, and most famously, an ejector seat activated by a button hidden in the gear shift. The car itself became a star, as iconic as Bond himself. Children around the world would dream of driving that Aston Martin, and it would appear in Bond films for decades to come, a faithful companion to different actors wearing the 007 mantle. The film also gave us Auric Goldfinger, a villain whose plan was audaciously simple: break into Fort Knox and irradiate the United States gold supply, making his own gold more valuable. The character was brought to life by German actor Gert Frobe, whose voice was actually dubbed in post-production because his English wasn't strong enough. Yet his physical presence, his calm menace, created one of cinema's most memorable villains. And his henchman, Odd Job, with his deadly steel-rimmed bowler hat, became equally iconic. Shirley Bassey's powerful voice opened Goldfinger with a title song that set a new standard. The tradition of a theme song had begun with From Russia with Love, but Goldfinger elevated it to an art form. Bassey held the final note for an impressively long time, so long that she nearly fainted during the recording. The song reached number 8 on the Billboard Hot 100, proving that Bond music could succeed on the charts as well as in the cinema. From this point forward, the Bond theme song would become an event in itself, with major artists competing for the honor. Goldfinger was a massive success, earning over $125 million worldwide. More than that, it sparked what the media began calling Bondomania. James Bond was everywhere: in toy stores, on lunchboxes, in comic strips, on television specials. The tuxedo-clad secret agent had become a symbol of the 1960s, representing a fantasy of sophistication and adventure that audiences couldn't get enough of. Sean Connery, once earning his modest weekly wage, was now one of the most recognizable faces in the world. The formula was perfected with the next film, Thunderball, released in 1965. This was the most expensive Bond film yet, with a budget of $9 million, much of it spent on elaborate underwater sequences filmed in the crystal-clear waters of the Bahamas. The film featured extensive scuba diving scenes, underwater battles, and a plot involving stolen nuclear weapons. It was ambitious, spectacular, and audiences loved every moment of it. Thunderball became the most financially successful Bond film of the 1960s, and when adjusted for inflation, it remains one of the highest-grossing Bond films of all time. It earned over $141 million during its initial release, an astronomical sum for 1965. The film's success confirmed that Bond was more than a passing fad. This was a franchise that could continue indefinitely, with each film building on the success of the last. But the demands of playing Bond were taking their toll on Sean Connery. The constant public attention, the grueling promotional tours, the typecasting that made it difficult for him to take on other roles, it was wearing him down. After Thunderball, Connery announced that he would do just one more Bond film. That film would be You Only Live Twice, released in 1967, which took production to Japan and featured Bond faking his own death and undergoing a transformation to blend in with the Japanese population. You Only Live Twice had the largest budget yet at $9.5 million and introduced audiences to the massive volcano lair set designed by Ken Adam. This elaborate set, built at Pinewood Studios, became one of the most famous pieces of production design in film history. It cost more than any other single element of the film and represented the heights of Bond's visual ambition. The volcano opened up to reveal a hidden rocket launch facility, a lair worthy of the villain Blofeld, who finally appeared on screen for the first time, played by Donald Pleasence. The film also gave us one of the most beloved Bond songs, with Nancy Sinatra performing the dreamy, romantic theme song. Her soft, whispering vocal style was completely different from Shirley Bassey's powerful belting, showing that Bond themes could take many forms. The song captured a certain wistfulness, perhaps reflecting the fact that this was meant to be Connery's final appearance as Bond, the end of an era. Relax now, let these images flow through your mind like a gentle stream: the silver Aston Martin, the golden voice of Shirley Bassey, the underwater ballet of Thunderball. Breathe slowly, and drift deeper into comfort. Part 4. A New Bond and Changing Times. Close your eyes and breathe deeply. Let the story continue to wash over you like gentle waves. With Sean Connery stepping away from the role, the producers faced an unprecedented challenge. Could James Bond survive without the actor who had defined him? They needed someone new, someone who could make the role their own while honoring what Connery had created. Their search led them to an Australian model and actor named George Lazenby, a man who had never acted in a major film before. It was an unconventional choice, a gamble that would become one of the most fascinating chapters in Bond history. Lazenby's story of landing the role has become legendary. He had been working as a model, appearing in advertisements, when he decided to pursue the Bond role. For his audition, he bought a suit from Sean Connery's tailor, got his hair cut by Connery's barber, and walked into the interview with such confidence that he convinced the producers he was right for the part. It was a performance before he ever stepped in front of a camera, and it worked. He was offered the chance to become the second James Bond. The film chosen for Lazenby's debut was On Her Majesty's Secret Service, based on one of Ian Fleming's most personal and emotional novels. Released in 1969, it was a departure from the increasingly fantastical tone of the late Connery films. This was a Bond story with genuine emotion at its heart, a story about love and loss. The budget was $7 million, and the film featured stunning alpine locations, elaborate ski chase sequences, and a more vulnerable version of Bond than audiences had seen before. On Her Majesty's Secret Service introduced Diana Rigg as Tracy, the woman who would become Bond's wife. The chemistry between Lazenby and Rigg was genuine and touching. Tracy was not just another Bond girl, she was Bond's equal, strong and independent, someone who could match him in courage and spirit. Their love story formed the emotional core of the film, building toward a wedding scene that remains one of the most beautiful moments in the entire Bond series. But the film ended with tragedy. In the final scene, Tracy is shot and killed by Blofeld, dying in Bond's arms on their wedding day. Bond holds her, unable to accept what has happened, telling a passing policeman, "It's quite all right. She's having a rest. We'll be going on soon. There's no hurry, you see. We have all the time in the world." Those words, echoing the film's love theme sung by Louis Armstrong, created one of the most heartbreaking moments in the franchise. For once, Bond couldn't save the day. For once, he truly lost. The film's reception was mixed at the time. Some audiences struggled to accept a new Bond, especially one following the beloved Connery. The film performed well at the box office, earning $64 million, but it was considered a disappointment compared to the massive success of previous entries. Yet over time, On Her Majesty's Secret Service has been reassessed by critics and fans alike, now often cited as one of the very best Bond films, praised for its emotional depth, spectacular action sequences, and Lazenby's surprisingly strong performance. George Lazenby made a decision that he would later call the biggest mistake of his life. He chose not to return for a second Bond film. Influenced by advice that the Bond series was becoming outdated in the changing culture of the late 1960s, and wanting to pursue other opportunities, he walked away after just one film. He remains the only actor to play Bond in an official Eon Productions film just once, a unique position in the franchise's history. The producers found themselves in the unexpected position of needing to find another Bond, and this time they turned back to the man who started it all. Sean Connery was persuaded to return for one more film, Diamonds Are Forever, released in 1971. The producers offered him $1.25 million, a record-breaking salary for the time, making him the highest-paid actor in the world. Connery accepted, but with the understanding that this would truly be his final Bond film for Eon Productions. Diamonds Are Forever took Bond to Las Vegas, embracing the glitzy, colorful aesthetic of early 1970s America. The film had a lighter, more humorous tone, perhaps reflecting the psychedelic influences of the era. It featured Charles Gray as Blofeld, bringing a sophisticated menace to Bond's archenemy. The film was a commercial success, earning over $116 million worldwide, proving that audiences would always return for Sean Connery's Bond, even after the experimental departure of the previous film. The film included some of the most memorable stunts of the series, including a thrilling car chase through the narrow streets of Las Vegas where Bond's Mustang Mach-1 tilts onto two wheels to squeeze through an impossibly tight alley. The stunt was performed in a single take, with the car entering the alley on its right wheels and emerging on its left wheels, though the film edited it differently. It was pure movie magic, the kind of impossible action that Bond films were becoming famous for. Rest now in this moment, imagine the snow-capped Alps, the gentle voice of Louis Armstrong singing of time and love. Feel yourself sinking deeper into peaceful relaxation, knowing Bond's journey continues on. Part 5. The Moore era begins. Breathe slowly and evenly, let your body grow heavier, more relaxed, as we continue our gentle journey. With Sean Connery's departure once again, the producers needed to find their third James Bond, someone who could bring something new to the role while keeping audiences engaged. They found their answer in Roger Moore, a British actor who had already achieved fame on television as Simon Templar in The Saint and Lord Brett Sinclair in The Persuaders. Moore was 45 years old when he was cast, making him the oldest actor to debut as Bond, bringing a maturity and sophistication that would define his interpretation. Roger Moore's Bond was different from the beginning. Where Connery had brought raw masculinity and danger, Moore brought charm, wit, and a raised eyebrow that could convey volumes. His Bond was lighter, more comfortable with humor, almost playful at times. Some critics would say his Bond was too light, but audiences embraced this new interpretation. Moore understood that he couldn't and shouldn't try to imitate Connery, he had to make Bond his own. His first film, Live and Let Die, released in 1973, broke new ground for the series. It was the first Bond film to feature a theme song that reached #1 in the United States. Paul McCartney and Wings performed the title track, bringing rock and roll energy to the Bond musical tradition. The song was written specifically for the film, and McCartney's soaring vocals and driving rhythm created an instant classic. That theme song became one of McCartney's most enduring solo works, played at his concerts for decades to come. Live and Let Die took Bond into new territory, both literally and thematically. The film dealt with heroin trafficking and featured significant sequences in Harlem and New Orleans, bringing Bond into the world of blaxploitation cinema that was popular in the early 1970s. It featured Yaphet Kotto as the villain Kananga and introduced the character of Sheriff J.W. Pepper, a Louisiana lawman who provided comic relief. The film also featured one of the most spectacular stunts in Bond history, a speedboat chase through the Louisiana bayous that included a jump over a road, with the boat actually leaping over several cars. The speedboat jump was performed by stuntman Jerry Comeau, a local boat expert who knew the waterways intimately. The stunt required perfect timing and incredible skill, and it was captured in one perfect take. The boat became airborne, sailed over the road, and landed cleanly in the water on the other side. It was pure cinema, the kind of practical stunt work that would become increasingly rare as special effects technology advanced. The entire sequence remains one of the most thrilling in the Bond canon. Moore's second film, The Man with the Golden Gun, released in 1974, featured Christopher Lee as the villain Scaramanga, a master assassin who charged $1 million per kill. Lee and Moore were actually cousins by marriage and old friends, which added an interesting dynamic to their on-screen rivalry. Lee brought elegance and menace to Scaramanga, creating a villain who was almost Bond's dark mirror image, a man who had chosen to use his skills for purely mercenary purposes. The film is famous for featuring one of the most audacious stunts ever filmed, the corkscrew car jump. Bond's AMC Hornet performs a complete 360-degree barrel roll while jumping across a broken bridge over a river in Thailand. The stunt was designed using computer modeling, making it one of the first movie stunts to be calculated mathematically before being performed. Stuntman Bumps Willard executed the jump perfectly on the first take, spiraling through the air in what remains one of the most impressive practical effects in action cinema. However, the filmmakers made a curious decision for this spectacular stunt. They added a comedy sound effect, a slide whistle, as the car spins through the air. This choice has been debated by fans for decades. Some feel it undermined the seriousness of an incredible achievement, turning a jaw-dropping moment into something comical. Others argue it fit with Roger Moore's lighter interpretation of Bond. Either way, the stunt itself remains remarkable, a testament to the courage of the stunt performers and the ambition of the Bond filmmakers. The mid-1970s saw James Bond facing new competition. In 1977, a film called Star Wars changed cinema forever, ushering in an era of science fiction blockbusters that captured the public imagination. The producers of the Bond films realized they needed to respond, to show that 007 could compete with this new wave of spectacular entertainment. The answer was The Spy Who Loved Me, released in 1977, which would become one of the most beloved Roger Moore Bond films and one of the biggest spectacles in the series' history. The Spy Who Loved Me opened with one of the most famous sequences in Bond history. Bond is skiing down a mountain in Austria, being chased by enemy agents. He skis off the edge of a cliff, plummeting through the air in what appears to be certain death, before a Union Jack parachute opens, revealing itself in a moment of pure cinematic joy. The stunt was performed by Rick Sylvester, a professional skier and base jumper, who was paid $30,000 for a single jump. The sequence took multiple camera crews positioned at different angles to capture, and it created one of the most iconic images in the entire Bond series. It was a statement. James Bond could still deliver moments that took your breath away. Let yourself float now, like Bond falling through that crystal-clear mountain air. Feel the freedom, the weightlessness, your breathing slow and steady, your mind drifting peacefully, as the story continues to unfold around you. Part 6. Spectacle and Evolution. Settle deeper into comfort now. Let each word wash over you like a gentle tide, carrying you toward peaceful rest. The Spy Who Loved Me gave audiences one of the most memorable Bond villains of all time, Jaws, played by 7'2" tall actor Richard Kiel. With his metal teeth that could bite through anything, Jaws became an instant icon. But what made the character truly special was that despite his fearsome appearance, he survived his encounter with Bond and would return in the next film, something almost unprecedented for a Bond henchman. Audiences loved Jaws so much that the character evolved from pure villain to something more sympathetic, even finding love in his second appearance. The film also introduced the Lotus Esprit, a sleek white sports car that had a secret: it could transform into a submarine. The underwater sequences with the car gliding through the ocean like a mechanical fish captured imaginations worldwide. After the film's release, the Lotus Company received countless inquiries from people wanting to buy the submarine car, not realizing it was purely a movie creation. The car used for the underwater scenes was actually a complete submarine built to look like a Lotus, operated by a Navy SEAL named Don Griffin who wore scuba gear and sat in a modified interior. Following the enormous success of The Spy Who Loved Me, which earned over $185 million worldwide, the next Bond film needed to be even bigger. Moonraker, released in 1979, took Bond to space, riding the wave of science fiction popularity that Star Wars had created. It was the most expensive Bond film made up to that point, with a budget of $34 million. The film featured elaborate sets, including a full space station interior, and showcased special effects that pushed the boundaries of what Bond films had attempted before. The opening sequence of Moonraker featured a skydiving fight that remains one of the most ambitious action sequences in the series. Bond is pushed from an airplane without a parachute and must catch up to another falling skydiver to steal their parachute, all while fighting off an attacker. The sequence required 88 parachute jumps over several weeks of filming, with cameramen in free fall capturing the action. It was an extraordinarily complex and dangerous shoot, yet it resulted in a breathtaking opening that set the tone for the spectacular film that followed. Moonraker brought Jaws back, and this time the character found an unlikely romance with a petite blonde woman named Dolly. When Jaws finally turned against the villain to help Bond, it was because he had found something worth protecting: love. It was a surprisingly sweet turn for such a fearsome character, showing the flexibility and playfulness that the Moore era brought to Bond. The film was another massive commercial success, earning over $210 million worldwide, making it the highest-grossing Bond film of its time. But as the 1980s began, there was a sense that perhaps the Bond films had gone too far into fantasy and spectacle. The next film, For Your Eyes Only, released in 1981, was deliberately designed as a return to basics, a more grounded and realistic Bond adventure. The pre-title sequence featured a bold move. It showed Bond visiting the grave of his wife Teresa, referencing on Her Majesty's Secret Service and acknowledging the emotional history of the character. It was a reminder that beneath all the gadgets and spectacle, there was a man who had loved and lost. For Your Eyes only featured perhaps the most dangerous stunt sequence in any Bond film, a lengthy rock climbing scene where Bond scales a sheer cliff face in Greece. The sequence was filmed with stuntmen and Roger Moore himself climbing the actual Meteora clifftops, with minimal safety equipment visible on screen. The cameras captured the dizzying heights and genuine danger, creating a sequence that was more thrilling for its realism than any amount of special effects could have achieved. The tension came from knowing that real people were truly in peril on those ancient rocks. The theme song For Your Eyes only was performed by Sheena Easton, and she became the first and only artist to actually appear in a Bond title sequence, shown singing as part of the opening credits. Her face and performance were woven into Maurice Binder's artistic designs, creating a unique title sequence that put the performer front and center. The song itself was nominated for an Academy Award, continuing the tradition of Bond themes being recognized as significant musical achievements. By 1983, something unusual happened in the world of James Bond. There were 2 Bond films released in the same year. Roger Moore starred in Octopussy, the official Eon Productions film, while Sean Connery returned to play Bond one final time in Never Say Never Again, a remake of Thunderball produced outside the official series due to complex legal rights. The Battle of the Bonds, as it was called, saw the 56-year-old Connery competing against the 55-year-old Moore. Both men were now showing their age, but both brought the experience and charm that had made them beloved Bonds. Octopussy featured an elaborate sequence set in India, with Bond pursuing villains through the streets in a tuk-tuk and later dressing as a clown to infiltrate a circus. Some felt the clown disguise was too silly, a step too far even for Roger Moore's light-hearted approach. Yet the scene where Bond, dressed as a clown, desperately tries to convince authorities of a nuclear bomb hidden in the circus base has a genuine tension beneath the absurdity. Moore sold the moment with real urgency, reminding audiences that even in the most outlandish scenarios, Bond was still a man trying to save lives. Rest now, imagine the quiet depths of the ocean, the Lotus gliding silently through blue water, feel yourself drifting, peaceful and serene, your breath moving like gentle waves, as you sink deeper into tranquil sleep. Part 7. A New Bond for a New Generation. Let your muscles relax completely, feel the weight leaving your body, as we continue this gentle journey through time. Roger Moore's final Bond film came in 1985, With a View to a Kill. At 57 years old, Moore became the oldest actor to play Bond in an official film, and he himself felt it was time to pass the torch. The film featured Christopher Walken as the villain Max Zorin and Grace Jones as the memorable henchwoman May Day, bringing a new wave punk aesthetic to the traditionally elegant Bond universe. The title song, performed by the band Duran Duran, became a significant hit, reaching number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100. It was only the second Bond theme to achieve this feat, and it introduced Bond to a younger generation through the wildly popular music video that aired constantly on MTV. A View to a Kill featured a spectacular sequence on the Eiffel Tower and an elaborate finale on the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. Roger Moore had expressed his discomfort with heights throughout his Bond tenure, yet here he was, at age 57, performing scenes high above San Francisco Bay. The Golden Gate Bridge sequence required extensive cooperation with local authorities and careful choreography to ensure safety while creating the illusion of danger. It was a fitting end to Moore's time as Bond, spectacular, slightly impossible, and thoroughly entertaining. After playing James Bond 7 times over 12 years, more than any other actor, Roger Moore bid farewell to the role he had made his own. The search began once again for a new Bond, and this time the producers wanted to take the character in a different direction. They needed someone who could bring back some of the danger and edge that had been present in the early Connery films, while still maintaining the entertainment value audiences expected. They found their answer in a Welsh actor named Timothy Dalton. Timothy Dalton had actually been considered for the role back in the late 1960s, when they were looking to replace Sean Connery the first time, but he had felt too young then, believing he needed more life experience to play Bond. Now, at 41, he felt ready. Dalton was a classically trained Shakespearean actor who had read all of Ian Fleming's original novels to prepare for the role. He wanted to bring Bond back to Fleming's vision, a darker, more troubled character, a man who carried the weight of his profession. Dalton's first film, The Living Daylights, released in 1987, immediately established a different tone. This Bond was more serious, more intense, with fewer quips and less of the eyebrow-raising humor that Moore had perfected. The film opened with a training exercise that turns deadly, reminding audiences that Bond's world was genuinely dangerous. The plot involved Cold War intrigue, defecting Soviet officers, and arms dealers, feeling more grounded in the geopolitical realities of the late 1980s. The title song for The Living Daylights was performed by the Norwegian band a-ha, who were at the height of their international fame following their massive hit Take On Me. The band actually recorded 2 songs for the film, the main title theme and If There Was a Man, which played during the end credits. The title theme had the dramatic orchestration of classic Bond while incorporating a-ha's distinctive synthpop sound, creating a bridge between Bond's traditional sound and the contemporary music scene of the late 1980s. The Living Daylights was a commercial success, earning over $191 million worldwide, proving that audiences were ready to embrace a more serious Bond. Dalton brought intensity and intelligence to the role, making Bond feel like a real intelligence operative rather than a superhero. His Bond showed vulnerability, doubt, and genuine anger. When he fought, it looked brutal and real. This was a Bond who got hurt, who bled, who struggled. The political landscape was changing rapidly in the late 1980s. The Berlin Wall fell in 1989, effectively ending the Cold War that had been the backdrop for so many Bond adventures. Dalton's second and final film, License to Kill, released in 1989, reflected this changing world by moving away from Cold War themes entirely. Instead, the film focused on drug trafficking and featured Bond going rogue, pursuing a personal vendetta against a drug lord who had harmed his friend Felix Leiter. License to Kill was notably violent for a Bond film, receiving a PG-13 rating in the United States, a first for the series. The film featured brutal scenes including a man being fed to sharks and explosive decompression. Dalton's Bond was driven by genuine rage and grief, operating outside the law, stripped of his license to kill by M. It was the darkest, grittiest Bond film yet made, and while it had its admirers, it divided audiences who weren't sure they wanted Bond to be quite this dark and serious. The film's box office performance was disappointing compared to previous entries, earning $156 million worldwide. Part of this was due to intense competition that summer from films like Batman and Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade. But there was also a sense that perhaps the film had gone too far in the opposite direction from Moore's light touch. The Bond franchise found itself at a crossroads, uncertain about what audiences wanted from 007 as the world entered a new decade. Let go now, feel yourself floating in that space between waking and dreaming, the sounds of the world fading away, your breathing soft and rhythmic, like waves on a distant shore, drift deeper, deeper still, into peaceful rest. Part 8. Reinvention and Return. Your eyelids are heavy, so heavy, let them close if they haven't already, and continue this peaceful journey with me. After License to Kill, something unprecedented happened. James Bond disappeared from cinema screens for 6 years. Legal disputes between the producers and the studio, combined with uncertainty about the character's direction in the post-Cold War world, kept 007 in limbo. Timothy Dalton had been prepared to return for a third film, but as the delays stretched on, he eventually decided to step away from the role in 1994. The world had changed dramatically. The Soviet Union had collapsed, the Internet was emerging, and action films were evolving. The question facing the producers was simple but daunting: did the world still need James Bond? The search for a new Bond was extensive and highly publicized. The producers considered many actors, but they kept returning to one name: Pierce Brosnan, an Irish actor who had become famous playing the title role in the television series Remington Steele. Brosnan had actually been offered the role back in 1986 to replace Roger Moore, but his television contract had prevented him from accepting. Now, nearly a decade later, the role was finally his. At 42 years old, Brosnan brought a combination of Connery's danger and Moore's charm, a perfect blend for Bond's return. GoldenEye, released in 1995, was Bond's comeback, and it needed to prove that 007 still mattered. The film had a budget of $60 million and was directed by Martin Campbell, who brought a fresh perspective to the series. The film opened with one of the most spectacular stunts in Bond history. Bond chases an unmanned motorcycle off the edge of a cliff, then free falls after it, catches it in mid-air, and flies it into a plummeting airplane, pulling up just before crashing into the mountain below. The entire sequence, filmed in Switzerland, took weeks to choreograph and execute, requiring precision timing from stunt pilot Jake Lombard, who flew the plane through the narrow mountain valley. The bungee jump that opens GoldenEye, where Bond leaps from the top of a dam in Switzerland, was performed by stuntman Wayne Michaels. At 220 meters, it was the highest bungee jump ever filmed at the time, from the Vasaska Dam in Ticino, Switzerland. The jump became so famous that the dam now offers bungee jumping as a tourist attraction, with thousands of people paying to recreate Bond's leap. It was a perfect opening statement. Bond was back, and he was going to do things that took your breath away. GoldenEye also modernized Bond in important ways. Judi Dench was cast as M, making her the first woman to play Bond's superior officer. Her first scene with Bond was confrontational and memorable, with M calling Bond a sexist, misogynist dinosaur, a relic of the Cold War, forcing the character to reckon with how the world had changed. It was a brilliant way to acknowledge criticism of the character while showing that Bond could evolve. Dench brought gravitas and toughness to the role, and she would continue playing M for 7 films, becoming one of the most beloved characters in the franchise. The villain of GoldenEye was particularly compelling, a former 006 agent named Alec Trevelyan, played by Sean Bean, who had become disillusioned and turned against Britain. The idea of Bond facing a mirror image of himself, someone who had been trained the same way but made different choices, added emotional weight to the story. The film dealt with themes of loyalty, betrayal, and the cost of being a secret agent in ways that felt mature and relevant to the post-Cold War world. The theme song for GoldenEye was performed by Tina Turner, and it was written by Bono and The Edge of U2. Turner's powerful, soulful voice brought drama and emotion to the opening credits, and at 55 years old, she proved that Bond themes could be timeless, performed by artists at any stage of their careers. The song reached the top 10 in numerous countries and was nominated for various awards, re-establishing the Bond theme song as a cultural event. GoldenEye was a massive success, earning over $350 million worldwide, making it the highest-grossing Bond film up to that point when not adjusted for inflation. More importantly, it proved that Bond was not a relic but a character who could adapt and thrive in a new era. Critics praised the film for balancing spectacular action with genuine emotion and intelligence. Bond was back, and he was relevant again. The success of GoldenEye was not limited to cinema. The film inspired a video game for the Nintendo 64 console, developed by Rare and released in 1997. GoldenEye 007 became one of the most critically acclaimed and best-selling games of all time, introducing millions of young people to James Bond through gaming. The game's multiplayer mode became legendary, with friends gathering to play split-screen deathmatches in the game's faithfully recreated movie locations. For many people who grew up in the late 1990s, their first real introduction to Bond came through this game. Pierce Brosnan's second film, Tomorrow Never Dies, arrived in 1997 and featured Jonathan Pryce as a media mogul trying to start a war between Britain and China for television ratings. The film's villain felt prescient, touching on themes of media manipulation and fake news that would become even more relevant in the following decades. The film featured spectacular action sequences, including a remote-controlled BMW 750 Illinois that Bond operates from the back seat using his cell phone, and a motorcycle chase through the streets of Saigon with Bond and Bond girl Wai Lin handcuffed together. Close your eyes and feel the rush of air, falling through clouds, the gentle pull of gravity, but you are safe, comfortable, drifting peacefully. Your mind wandering through these stories like a pleasant dream, let sleep embrace you. Part 9. The Brosnan era concludes. You are so relaxed now, every breath taking you deeper into tranquility. Let the story continue to flow around you like water. Pierce Brosnan's third Bond film, The World Is Not Enough, arrived in 1999, marking a significant moment. It was the last Bond film to be released in the 20th century, a poignant milestone for a character who had defined so much of Cold War and post-Cold War popular culture. The film featured Sophie Musso as Elektra King, one of the most complex Bond women in the series. What made Elektra unique was that she turned out to be the true villain of the piece, not a victim to be rescued but a manipulator using Bond for her own ends. It was a sophisticated twist that gave the film unexpected depth. The title of "The World Is Not Enough" came from the Bond family motto, which appears in On Her Majesty's Secret Service. The Latin phrase orbis non sufficit translates to "the world is not enough," a statement of ambition that could apply equally to Bond's dedication to protecting the world or to a villain's limitless greed. The film used this theme to explore what drives both heroes and villains, what happens when duty or desire becomes all-consuming. The theme song was performed by Garbage, the alternative rock band, bringing a darker, moodier sound to the Bond opening. The World Is Not Enough featured Denise Richards as nuclear physicist Dr. Christmas Jones, a casting choice that received criticism at the time. The film ended with Bond and Christmas together, leading to perhaps the worst double entendre in Bond history when 007 says, "I thought Christmas only comes once a year." Even Pierce Brosnan later admitted the line made him wince. Yet despite this misstep, the film was another commercial success, earning over $390 million worldwide, showing that audiences remained enthusiastic about Brosnan's Bond. As the world entered the new millennium, there was excitement about what the 21st century would bring for James Bond. The 20th official Eon Productions Bond film, Die Another Day, was released in 2002, marking the 40th anniversary of Dr. No. The film was designed as a celebration, filled with references to previous Bond films, including gadgets and moments that recalled the franchise's long history. The production budget was $142 million, the highest for any Bond film at that time, reflecting both inflation and the ambition to create something spectacular for this milestone. Die Another Day featured Halle Berry as Jinx, a character the producers hoped might spawn her own spin-off series. Berry emerged from the ocean in an orange bikini in a scene that deliberately echoed Ursula Andress's famous entrance in Dr. No, creating a visual link between Bond's past and present. Berry had just won the Academy Award for Best Actress for her role in Monsters Ball, making her one of the most prestigious actresses ever to appear in a Bond film. The chemistry between Brosnan and Berry was palpable, though the planned Jinx spin-off film never materialized. The film featured some of the most extensive use of CGI in any Bond film to date, including a controversial sequence where Bond parasurfs on a massive tidal wave caused by melting ice. Many fans and critics felt the CGI was too obvious and took them out of the movie, representing a moment where the Bond films perhaps relied too heavily on digital effects rather than the practical stunts that had defined the series. The Invisible Car, an Aston Martin Vanquish with adaptive camouflage, was another element that some felt pushed the gadgetry too far into fantasy. Madonna performed the theme song for Die Another Day, and she also made a cameo appearance in the film as a fencing instructor. The electronic, processed sound of the song divided opinion, with some praising its modernity and others feeling it lacked the classic Bond sound. The music video featured Madonna engaged in a sword fight, reflecting the fencing sequences in the film. Madonna was paid a reported $5 million for the song and her appearance, one of the largest fees ever paid for a Bond theme. Die Another Day was a box office success, earning over $430 million worldwide, making it the highest-grossing Pierce Brosnan Bond film and proving that audiences still loved 007 at the turn of the millennium. The film featured a sword fight scene between Bond and the villain Graves that lasted several minutes, one of the longest and most elaborately choreographed blade combat sequences in the franchise. The scene was filmed at Blades Club, bringing an old-world elegance to the modern film. However, Despite the commercial success, there was a growing sense among critics and even within the production team that the Bond films had become too reliant on spectacle, too cartoonish, too far removed from any sense of reality or danger. The invisible car, the parasurfing, the over-the-top CGI. Bond was in danger of becoming a parody of himself. When Pierce Brosnan's contract ended after Die Another Day, the producers made a difficult decision. They would not ask him to return for a fifth film. Instead, they would reboot the entire franchise, taking Bond back to basics. The decision to move on from Pierce Brosnan was controversial. He had been a successful Bond, popular with audiences, and had delivered 4 financially successful films over 7 years. But the producers, Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson, who had taken over from Albert Broccoli after his death in 1996, felt it was time for a radical change. They wanted to strip away the accumulated excesses and return to Ian Fleming's original conception: a tough, dangerous man doing a difficult job, someone who could get hurt, someone more human than superhero. Breathe slowly, in and out, feel your body sinking into perfect comfort, the story washing over you like a warm tide, your thoughts becoming softer, gentler, as you drift toward peaceful sleep. Let go completely now. Part 10. A New Beginning and Modern Bond. You are so deeply relaxed now, floating in that peaceful space. Let these final moments of the story carry you gently into restful sleep. The search for a new Bond led the producers to a relatively unknown British actor named Daniel Craig. At 38 years old when he was cast in 2005, Craig was a serious dramatic actor, known for roles in films like Layer Cake and Munich, but he was blonde, and he was perceived as less traditionally handsome than previous Bonds. The announcement was met with significant controversy and criticism. Some fans created websites opposing his casting, arguing that Bond should never be blonde. The pressure on Craig was immense, but he was determined to prove himself worthy of the role. The film chosen for Craig's debut was Casino Royale, finally bringing Fleming's first novel to the screen as part of the official series. The producers hired Martin Campbell, who had successfully relaunched Bond with GoldenEye, to direct this new beginning. The approach was radically different. This would be a Bond origin story, showing how 007 earned his license to kill and became the hardened agent we know. The film would be grounded, realistic, and emotionally raw, stripping away the gadgets and impossible stunts in favor of brutal, consequence-laden action. Casino Royale, released in 2006, opened with a stunning black-and-white sequence showing Bond earning his 00 status through 2 kills. The first kill is messy, violent, a struggle in a bathroom that feels genuinely dangerous. The second kill is cleaner, a single shot to a corrupt MI6 section chief. When Bond is asked if the second kill was easier, he replies coldly, yes. These opening moments established a Bond we had never seen before, a blunt instrument being forged into a precise weapon, someone capable of violence but not yet comfortable with it. The film featured one of the most shocking moments in Bond history. During a torture scene, Bond is tied naked to a chair while the villain Le Chiffre attacks him with a knotted rope, threatening his ability to have children. It was brutal, uncomfortable, and completely unlike anything in previous Bond films. Craig played the scene with defiance and dark humor, showing Bond's resilience even in the face of unbearable pain. It demonstrated that this new Bond could suffer, could be vulnerable, and that there would be real stakes in his adventures. Eva Green played Vesper Lynd, and her chemistry with Daniel Craig created the most emotionally affecting romance in any Bond film since On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Vesper was intelligent, complicated, and ultimately tragic. When she betrays Bond and then drowns herself in a Venice elevator, Bond's reaction is not a casual quip but genuine grief and rage. For the first time in decades, a Bond film asked audiences to care about Bond's emotional state, to see him as someone capable of love and therefore capable of being destroyed by loss. The famous Bond. James Bond introduction in Casino Royale doesn't come until the very end of the film, after Bond has completed his first mission, earned his 007 status, and learned the lessons that would define him. When he finally speaks those words, wearing a perfect suit and carrying himself with confidence, we understand that we've watched James Bond being born. The gun barrel sequence, traditionally at the film's beginning, was moved to the end, symbolizing that Bond's journey to becoming 007 was now complete. Casino Royale was a critical and commercial triumph, earning over $600 million worldwide and receiving widespread acclaim. Critics who had doubted Daniel Craig now praised him as one of the best Bonds ever, bringing depth and intensity to the role. The film's park-hour chase sequence at the beginning, filmed in Madagascar with freerunner Sebastian Foucan, became instantly iconic, showing that Bond could still deliver spectacular action without relying on CGI or impossibility. The theme song, You Know My Name, was performed by Chris Cornell of Soundgarden and Audioslave, and unusually, it was not titled after the film itself. The song's aggressive rock sound matched the raw intensity of Craig's Bond, and Cornell's powerful vocals captured both the danger and the darkness of this new interpretation. The song played over stylish opening credits designed by Daniel Kleinman that featured playing cards and silhouettes, perfectly setting the tone for the poker-focused plot. Craig's second film, Quantum of Solace, released in 2008, picked up immediately where Casino Royale ended, with Bond pursuing those responsible for Vesper's death. It was the first direct sequel in Bond history, with a runtime of just 106 minutes, making it the shortest Bond film ever made. The film was made during the 2008 Writers Guild strike, which affected the script development, and many felt the film suffered from a rushed, incomplete screenplay despite exciting action sequences. But Daniel Craig had firmly established himself as Bond, and the character had successfully transitioned into the 21st century. The reboot had worked, proving that James Bond could evolve while remaining true to his essential nature. From Ian Fleming's typewriter in Jamaica to Daniel Craig's intense portrayal, Bond had traveled through decades of cultural change, adapting to each era while maintaining the core elements that made the character timeless: courage, style, determination, and an unwavering commitment to duty. And so our journey comes to a close. Let yourself rest now, completely and deeply. James Bond will continue his adventures, but for you, now, there is only peace, and comfort, and the gentle embrace of sleep, your breathing slow and steady, your mind quiet and calm. Drift away now, into restful, restorative sleep. You are safe, you are comfortable, you are at peace. Good night.